Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Couple of Nukes. As always, I'm your host, Mr. Whiskey, and today's subject is, I almost want to say personal. In my youth, still in my youth, was definitely a sugar addict. As I've gotten older, the amount of sugar I consume has gone down a lot just because of more conscious and healthy eating habits, as well as my body just I may have given it too much when I was young. But it got to the point where if I didn't have sugar, I would get withdrawals, very angry, very irritable, needed to eat it, almost throughout the day. Definitely every day had some kind of donut or brownie or cake or candy. And I did eat M&Ms for breakfast this morning, so I guess I'm not as as cured as I'd like to be. I did have birthday cake and M&Ms for breakfast, but that's okay. It happens. But we're going to talk about why it's not okay and how bad, sugar and processed foods really are for you. We're here with the sugar-free man, Mr. Michael Collins. He's here to talk about how he has been sugar-free for decades and about the reality of sugar addiction, calling it a gateway drug, which is very interesting because for those of you who have caught our episodes on addiction recovery as far as alcoholism and smoking, one of the top substances that alcoholics switch to after they become sober is sugar. So I'm excited to tie it all together in today's episode. Mr. Collins, would you please go ahead and introduce yourself for us?
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's an honor. I like to get the message out, and I really relate to folks who are in the addiction recovery space. I've been come the day after Valentine's Day, I'll be sober for 40 years, and then my original work started as an addiction recovery program, helping drug addicts and alcoholics get sober and clean. And But I was just trying to get healthy when I got sober. It was, well, probably even starts before then. My mom was my favorite sugar junkie. It's kind of a sad story. Her mom, my grandmother, died when she was only 8 years old. And it was terrible. And she was the last one in the family. And my grandfather and her had to move in with his sister, who was my great aunt. And she wasn't the nicest person in the world. And so my grandfather made a deal with his cousin Jim, who owned the country store across the way, that if anytime my mom walked into that store, she could have any candy she wanted, just put it on his tab, which was wonderful for that child. But still, my mom grew up believing sugar was love. Okay. And that's how
Mm.
I grew up, covered up with sugar, just cakes and cookies and candies and just we used to put 3 times the recipe as Kool-Aid and all the
Wow.
sugar on the cereal and scraping it up with the milk. It was just, and no one ever said no. Like no one said, don't do that, because she was so attached to her love of sugar. And anyway, fast forward, and I ran into beer at 14 years old, 13, 14 years old. And here's an important part of the story, an important part of the, if you will, the transformation process that people in recovery or out of recovery, and I'm going to tell more about that story, need to understand. And this is really not really understood. And this is kind of my message, if you will, is that I knew that beer changed how I felt. It changed my state. I was kind of shy and I could go behind the high school and drink the beer and be able to talk to the girls at the dance, right? Well, anyway, now we can talk about that. I know that this is kind of about your subject matter, but that party lasted till I was 28, crashed a few cars, wet the bed a bunch of times, got arrested, a lot of crazy stuff, ran the biggest
Right.
nightclubs and that kind of stuff. But I got sober at 28 and I went right back to sugar. So sugar became, and it's in the big book of AA a couple times, that sugar becomes a substitute. You mentioned it earlier that it becomes a substitute for the drinking and stuff. And a lot of recovering folks stumble into that, as I did. Well, anyway, I met a woman in recovery actually, and we had a couple kids, and I raised those kids sugar free um, from the womb until they were 6 years old. And it's an important part of the story because I just believe that their brain developed better. And it's we'll go into the science of all that in a minute, but they always said I should write a book. So I kind of, I had a regular life. I had a regular business, a regular career, and it wasn't until I opened sugaraddiction.com in 2009, and I was still working, and I put out good information. People, it helped some folks, but it wasn't until 2016 we started doing these quit sugar summits that I really started to get back into it. And then the book came out in 2019 or 18 and was very successful. And that's when it kind of kicked off. I was semi-retired and I started coaching people. I started having online meetings and it went along and I was kind of geared up when this like perfect storm hit. And the perfect storm was, and it was the pandemic. Okay. So you guys remember this, they literally bought out all the sugar, the flour, the candy,
Right.
the ice cream, the alcohol, the soda, everything was gone. I mean, there was delivery problems and that kind of
Yeah.
thing. But still, people were at home eating and gaining weight, and they couldn't leave, right? And the second part of the perfect storm was it intersected with Zoom, like we are on right now. Even
Right.
grandma knew how to use Zoom, okay? And so Zoom became this, communication method. And so all hell broke loose. I had coaching a couple times a day. I had meetings, support meetings a couple times a day. Now we're up at 5 meetings a day. And over the last, say, 4 or 5 years since the pandemic, it's just chaos. It's just grown like insane. And now we have, like I said, the 5 meetings a day. We just got approved last year to with the National Board of Health and Wellness Coaches. And so, and during that time, somebody called me the sugar-free man, and that kind of stuck. So
Right.
that's the short version of how I ended up being the sugar-free man and got here. But it usually brings up more questions than it answers. But that's the version of the podcast version, if you will.
For sure. And when you mentioned more sugar than the recipe calls for, I immediately thought of myself and a lot of gentlemen and women down here in the South who do sweet tea and definitely put a
Sweet.
lot more. Sometimes we say you have some tea on your sugar there, guys, because we put so much sugar. In fact, you just remind me of I haven't thought about this in a while. I had a shipmate when I was in the Navy who took almost half of one of those big square yellow Domino sugar containers and
Yep.
dumped almost half of it onto his oatmeal. And we said, "Hey man, you've got some oatmeal on your sugar. You might want to, pick that out." Because he would just add so much sugar to his oatmeal and then adding, syrup and brown sugar and cinnamon on top of it. At that
Right.
point, it's no longer trending as much online, but specifically on TikTok, there was this thing called water talk, which was young women were adding flavored syrups to water because for some reason a lot of women from Gen Z, Alpha generation, and even millennials don't like drinking water. They just refuse to do it. And so people had started really using these flavor enhancement packets to
Hmm.
make their water better. And young women would have a whole carousel of like, 10, 12 different syrup packets or flavors. Sometimes they would put more than one. And a lot of the comments and concerns and, commentation was that there was so much sugar they were putting in their water, multiple sugar flavored packets from syrup to powders, that it
Mm.
was no longer healthy water. They had purple, green, blue. Some people even layered their drinks so that it had a purple top, a blue middle, and a green bottom. So at that point, it's really not water. And so we've seen how I want to tie that into you talk about having meetings and coaching and addiction accountability and how
Mm.
easy it is to slip up. With alcohol and drugs, it can be a little. Now, obviously, we know, especially me hosting an addiction recovery show, that addicts are great at hiding and covering their tracks if they're drinking or doing drugs. With sugar, it's even easier to hide because with alcohol changing your behavior and drugs changing your behavior, it can be a lot more difficult to cover up, especially when you're in those later stages of
Mm.
alcoholism and drug addiction. with
Right.
sugar, if you sneak a little, piece of candy or a little slice of cake or something, it's very hard to tell. So it's a
Mm.
lot easier to slip up, and it's a lot easier to say like, oh, it's just a little piece of candy compared to, oh, it's just one beer, it's just one wine. It's even more easy to justify, especially when more so than alcohol or drugs, you'll find sweets being served at every restaurant, at every party you go to, at every occasion, whether it's soda or food. So I'd love to get into the accountability part of the conversation and how easy it is to not slip up. And if you could talk about your own journey with temptation, going on 40 years of sugar sobriety here. I mean, have there been any moments where you almost slipped up or thought about it?
Oh yeah, I mean the most difficult part is the beginning, right? It's like you got to get detoxed and you have to think about it's not really like life-threatening like alcohol or opioids. It's like nicotine. I mean, it's annoying, but you can get through it with the proper nutrition and exercise and stuff. And that's really where the work begins, right? Cravings, which you're describing, cravings is really what I study them. I study cravings and denial. Obviously, we all know what denial is, and
Right.
it's very prevalent in all addiction, but definitely in the sugar addiction stuff, right? But the cravings part is super interesting to me because one of the things that people don't really, and part of my message is that people don't really understand that they're not looking for a sweet taste on their tongue. What they're looking for is a dopamine hit, like just like
Right.
alcohol or drugs. They're looking for, and when I say dopamine, because it's become kind of popular now and people know what it is, I really mean all of the brain and body reward chemicals, dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, GABA, oxytocin, adrenal glands, endorphins, cannabinoid receptors. All of the brain and body reward chemicals are affected by sugar. And when you have that craving, when you're trying to quit or trying to cut back, you're actually trying, you've got to know and feel in your gut that you're really trying to self-soothe. You're really trying to not feel something very similar. And you know this, I'm sure some of your guests that have talked about this, is that when you're like, it's a very common construct in the world of alcohol and drug addiction that if you started using alcohol and drugs at 14 or 15, you stopped growing emotionally at that point. And you have to think about it with sugar, if you're extrapolating it backwards to, say, 4 or 5, or probably in the womb, but 4 or 5 years old, and you get this patterning, just like I described in my story. You get this understanding that, and you don't think of it consciously. Like it's not like I'm 5 years old. I will not hurt if I use a little bit of sugar. It's not like you're, an adult and you say, I've had a crappy week and I just want a beer and numb out for a little bit. That's a conscious decision. And
Right.
the reason the perfect storm continues to grow and the obesity numbers continue to grow and the type 2 diabetes continues to grow is because this is a very unconscious process. People have not yet understood that their ingestion of sugar creates this emotional self-soothing. Now, when you look at the worlds of what they call emotional eating or comfort food, this is what, they get that partially right. They have it part of it right, but they don't really understand the addiction piece of the puzzle, that you can truly become biochemically addicted to sugar and it can numb you enough, just enough to make you feel a little bit better, right? Very similar that when people go into treatment or they go to a meeting or they start to recover from alcohol, they start to realize that that's what they were doing. They never thought of it until recovery. But the problem with the sugar thing is it's everywhere. I mean, it's like 3 times a day you got to look at, food, ultra processed carbs, flour, just a lot of stuff is part of the equation.
Right.
And people, again, I like to relieve people kind of like, a priest. Like it's not their fault, right? It's the food system. 85% of the food in the grocery store has sugar in it. And when people kind of look at it that way. And the other problem really is that the diet industry has, most people come to me for weight loss, right? And so the diet industry has manufactured this myth that if you eat less and exercise more, you'll lose the weight, right? But it's just not true. If you are one of the one third of people who biochemically have the difficulty processing sugar and that you have become emotionally addicted to it, then you're not going to be able to just not eat, to eat less. You're just not. And that's where those cravings come up, right? Because you are managing, you literally outsource your emotional life to sugar. And if you're doing that, if you have done that, when you stop, there's the common refrain is, Mike, I'm losing my mind, right? And that about day 15, day 20, people are like weepy and crying and upset and depressed and hungry and hangry and not sleeping well and getting breakouts and stuff. And they don't know what's happening to them because they don't have a guide. They don't have someone to walk them through it. So it's a little more complicated, but it's not that complicated that if someone, especially people from the addiction world, which would be your listeners, a lot of my folks come to me because I'm open about my addiction, um, that are in recovery already, but still, to a man, to a woman, they could not put down the sugar. They've gained a lot of weight. They've got a type 2 diabetes thing, and they haven't, as addiction savvy as they have not put the two things together. They have not put sugar as an addiction. They just never wanted to look at it like that. And then, I've got to kind of ease them into it. I meet them where they are because they want to lose weight or get their type 2 in under control. But eventually they start to realize, as does everyone who works in our program, that this is really an addiction recovery program. And that sugar, scientifically, through these summits that I've done and talking to the world's leading experts, that scientifically sugar is powerful enough to act like drugs and alcohol in this case, right? Anyway, it's a big topic, hard sometimes. These podcasts are perfect because it takes about the arc of a podcast to explain what people are missing and why, and the what the survey or the stats as well as I do, 95% of all people that lose any amount of weight gain it all back in the first year. And if you take a look at what I just explained, it's easy to explain, right?
Right.
Because things were okay when they started losing weight and they were exercising, which was helping their brain chemicals. And then all of a sudden something happens and they're off to the races again. Anyway, it's a big topic. It's a good question though.
For sure. It's interesting actually because my father, who struggles with alcoholism, he's never been a sweets guy, has never liked, is not asking for chocolate or cake, and at birthday parties and stuff, wouldn't go after that stuff. During
Hmm.
some of his, you know, periods of time where he was sober for the time being, he started eating these huge bowls of ice cream every night. And I never picked it up until later on in life why he was doing that because he was never a sweets guy. And now he's eating all the ice cream and
Yep.
wasn't even the flavors he liked. He was started eating our ice cream that was for me and my sisters, that kind of stuff that he wouldn't like. And I always thought it was so weird that my father in his late 40s, early 50s would suddenly start liking ice cream until
That's
after I
funny.
started running my show and talking to people such as yourself and other addicts that oh, that's what it's about. It's not about the ice cream itself. It's not about the sweets and even liking it. It's about that feeling that, can help him in his sobriety kind of quote stay calm, feel that same kind of sense of relief. And I
That's
think
so funny. My father did the same thing on the nights that he didn't drink. He was eating ice cream. Yep.
yeah, so for y'all listening, if that's happened in your life and you were wondering like that's so strange that it just happened, it might be a relationship there, but one of the things is you mentioned children and youth and sugar. And I remember sometimes I watched the show My 600 Pound Life, and there was an
Mm.
episode with two sisters who they thought for sure. I mean, the doctor was just dumbfounded when he heard them say this. They had been raised, and they believed this 100%, that if they had a diet soda it would cancel out whatever sugary drink or food they had. They
Mm.
believe that diet soda actually like destroyed the sugar, like it vaporized it. And I remember the doctor's face, and I remember my face when I heard that for the first time because they weren't joking. They 100%
Oh yeah.
thought that was the truth. And it's like one of those things where if you're raised that way. And I'd love to go into two things. For those just listening, not watching, behind me is an array of various sweets and candies. What we typically think of when we say sweets, we think cake, donuts, brownies, cookies, and candy, especially. But Mr. Collins, what you hinted at, you said around, I believe it was around 85%. Most foods in the grocery stores have sugar or processed sugar in it. So you're
Right.
talking about sugar beyond the realm of just candy. Can you kind of go into that part of the process? Because there's a lot of people who think if they cut out just cake and dessert at night, that they're avoiding the sugars. So I'd love for you to dive deeper into the reality of sugar in our, food system.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And it's kind of sad really because people don't realize it. You're right. They think about the candies and the sweets and stuff, but or whatever, the sodas and drinking your sugar, but they don't realize that the manufacturers of these products, ketchups and salad dressings and tomato sauces and all these kind of different canned goods and boxes and bags and cans have sugar in them, and they have them in for a reason because it brings people back to their product because they have this undiscernible light raise in self-esteem. They get that dopamine hit when they're having this particular salad dressing or what have you. They feel really good, and uh, and they literally manufacture. There's a couple of books out there, Hooked, and a couple others that talk about these campuses that food manufacturers have, where they literally slide people into MRIs and watch their brain chemicals watch their brain scans light up as they put the new product on their tongue, and it's weaponizing. It's criminal in my opinion, especially with the kids and the cereals and that kind of stuff, starting them really young like that. But it's absolutely true. And we talked about it before we came on, but people don't realize they do focus on the sugar part, but the ultra processed carbs in general, flours, pastas, breads, these things keep those cravings alive too.
Right.
They like your body's like it's getting part of the equation, like it's a donut or whatever has the flour and the sugar, and the body's saying, "Where's the rest of this?" It's like, "Where's the rest of the equation?" And your body gets attuned or gets basically addicted, but attuned to the two of them together. And sugar, flour, excuse me, turns to sugar right in your stomach. And what you're trying to avoid genuinely, and they're starting to call Alzheimer's diabetes 2 or 3, and that this is a brain illness. This is basically the word hijack comes to mind. It's like hijacking of your frontal cortex, right? And
Mm.
when that happens via the sugar, people just don't have the will, quote unquote, willpower. It's nothing to do with it, but willpower to resist, right? They think going out in the snowstorm you guys are about to get in to get ice cream is a good idea. And
Yeah.
I'm being kind of hard on this and this is a kind of a rough statement, but it's true. When people come to me, 20% first of all are crying. They're coming to me and they've
Wow.
never told another person this stuff about their sugar. But when they come to me, they are really truly not in a place mentally. They don't have the mental wherewithal to make the right decisions about their health and their weight. And the reason I say that is because they tell me this 6 months later when they're off the sugar. They say to me, like, I don't believe I did go out in a snowstorm for ice cream. I don't believe that I threw stuff in the garbage and I
Right.
started to, an hour later, I came back and ate the same cookies out of the garbage kind of thing. They don't think I've ever heard these stories before, but I've heard them hundreds of times. And so the problem with sugar is because of what we're discussing, its prevalence and it's almost free and any child can get it. But the problem is the dose makes the poison, which is important.
Mm.
I tell people to write that down, and they should write this down. the dose makes the poison. You'll take a little alcohol, you'll take a little heroin, you'll smoke a little marijuana, whatever. The problem is we are pounding 20, that's average, 20 teaspoons a day. Anybody that comes to me with any habit at all is at 30, 40, and sometimes even 50 teaspoons of sugar a day. And most people have never gone even 24 hours, let alone a week or a month without sugar. So
Right.
they don't know what reactions their body will have emotionally, physically, even spiritually. They don't realize what is going to happen to them. And when it happens, they're in shock. And unconsciously they know if they eat a little bit of sugar, all of those fears, worries, and anxieties will subside for 20 minutes. And so it's just a pattern. It's just a pattern that they fall into. So yeah, again, it takes about, 40, 30, 40, 50 minutes for people to kind of understand that it's just not a little sweet taste on your tongue. That's just like the body's
Right.
adaptation to how does it get the dopamine in. Or how does
Going
it get the
back,
dopamine activated, put it that way.
right, going back to the cereal, that's a
Yeah.
great example, especially in America. I mean, there is just an aisle dedicated to sugary cereals alone, and on most stores, either on the left or the right end, you'll find the healthy cereals. But even those, you got to be conscious about reading the back labels. Sure, it has 6 or 9 or 15 grams of protein and it's marketed as healthy, but what is the sugar content on the back? Because it's easy to distract people from sugar content when you've got protein, you've got organic, you've got all these key health words that are distracting from how much the sugar is. And I think part of what makes it so vicious, you talk about weaponization and target marketing, is the fact that sugar seems to be the most time efficient. Think about the sugary cereals, for example. Moms and dads who have kids and they're busy, it's easier to give them this cereal that's loaded with sugar and whatever than to stop and make a healthy breakfast or a salad. I mean, it's time
Yep.
management. Think about even fast food with processed food and sugars. It's easy to pick that up, then make an organic meal. And so it's really easy to market processed foods and sugary foods because they're efficient, they're quick. They can be and they come in a lot more, so to speak, cold forms that require
Mm.
little prep compared to warm foods. So it's definitely, easily marketed to a lot of the youth. And I want to go back, you talked about children, most having sugar from in the womb. I want to focus specifically on pregnant women. Would you advise pregnant women to be on a sugar-free diet?
Wow, you're going right to my heart, my friend. So look, um, I raised those boys sugar free, and they, this is my own personal opinion, and we've done a sugar free kids summit before too, okay, where we talked to 40 of the world's leading experts in pediatricians and doctors and nutritionists and stuff about sugar. And now even the government, uh, which is woefully behind
Right,
on
for
the
sure.
recommendations of food and the food pyramid and stuff, say that kids should under two should have no added sugar in their diet. So that's a bonus. But this was 35 years ago when I
Right,
raised
right.
the boys. And you're going to think this is just dad bragging or, whatever. You think I'm lying to you. But my boys are like rocket scientists smart, and I'm just not that smart. Their brain developed better, genuinely. And now there's two or three, and one of them's got a simple name, first 1,000 days. Okay. The first out from conception to two or three, the first 1,000 days, the brain is growing so much. And if you look at it on the other end with the diabetes 3, the Alzheimer's, and you start to understand the actual science that's exploded in the last 2 or 3 years, and we've talked about the frontal cortex and the dopamine and stuff, that the brain, this is a brain illness, and that the brain development of children is so important to if a woman to a child, if a woman finds out that she's pregnant and she's got a substance use disorder, alcoholism or drugs, she can quit that day. Like she doesn't need to go to treatment. She doesn't need to do anything. She will quit that day. Same with smoking. Quit that day. Walk
I've
out,
seen
throw the
it. Yeah.
cigarettes in the garbage. I've seen it. And they've been trying to quit drinking for years, but then accidentally or whatever, they get pregnant and they'll just quit that day. It's amazing. Well, the same thing with sugar, you know what I mean? Except, my mother gained 60 pounds on a 100-pound frame when she had me, and she told me she only ate sugar. Like you got to think about it, especially in a first birth. Like they're nervous, and their go-to has always been a sugar, and so it's always kind of cute. You have the hot fudge sundae with pickles on it. There's like a kind of a myth or something that they have funny tastes and whatever. And it's insidious. I think it's criminal to to ingest sugar during a pregnancy and or to give children sugar. They're one, two, three, four, five. They don't shop. They don't drive. They don't even know that they're eating sugar. They don't care.
Yeah.
Like, what's the difference? Like, feed them whole food, right? And again, this is no measure, but it's a kind of a societal measure that my boys got perfect scores on their college entrance exams. That's Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates kind of stuff. It's almost impossible to do. They're damn near impossible to do. And to them, substances are not attractive. Like they never have used substances, didn't develop like I did alcoholism because they didn't think of it as a self-soothing method because their original gateway drug, as we started this thing, they didn't have an attraction to a substance to help them self-soothe. It just didn't
Right.
exist in their life, right? Now, I mean, it's the answer to your question is categorically, I don't know what the way it was phrased, but children should not be using sugar. Um, I believe 50 years from now, they're going to say, they used to give sugar to kids, right? We're going to have the diagnostic tools to prove the things that I'm saying about the brain chemicals and about the brain reward system, right? And so it's really important that people understand this. And it's sad, it's just like I've been doing this for, a decade. I've interviewed 400 of the world's leading experts, all of my contemporaries, all the people who I used to be the chairman of the board of the Food Addiction Institute, and all of the people there, and all the people, 95% of our clients are women between 40, I like to say 40, but it's closer to 50 and 80 or 90 years old. And it's so mind-boggling that
Hmm.
women of childbearing age do not have this awareness. I just don't get it, really. There are a few, but it's rare, very rare. And I think that its time has come. It's coming. It's actually here now, scientifically. That and I emphasized this point enough? No,
Right.
people who are pregnant should not ingest sugar, and they should stop as soon as they find out they are pregnant.
For sure. We talked, there's two episodes I'm going to reference from my show where we kind of had a conversation about sugar and its effects in terms of children. The first
Mhm.
was how to have, childlike joy in your adult life with Moj. And we talked about how kids would naturally grow up liking vegetables and fruits. But when you give them all these candies, all these sweeter, artificial substances, it makes it hard for them to grow up and develop taste buds that actually like, fruits and vegetables because they have that option. In a
Yep.
similar sense, in our episode with Logan Hufford on the tragic reality of men's pornographic addiction, he gave this analogy for pornography, but it's true to real life. He
Yeah.
said that if you look at real life, real women as whatever, God designed fruit to be, a strawberry, watermelon, whatever fruit that you really enjoy that's sweet. Now you take pornography and social media, and that's like your, your M&Ms, your Hershey bar, whatever candy it is. It's 100 times sweeter than that strawberry or watermelon could ever be. It was naturally designed to only be a certain sweetness, and that was the sweetest. But humanity went and made artificial enhancements to make something sweeter. So in the social media world, that's, body enhancements, that's certain, content, all that stuff. And so I've been thinking about that analogy a lot, like
Mm.
we have natural sugars out there that, you know, are good to some degree, that are healthy to some degree, compared to, like you said, the dosage. I believe the dosage of, yes, fruits are high in sugars, but are they as high as these processed sugars that we're seeing that are far stronger, that have additionally, high fructose corn syrup on top of everything else. So
Right.
I think when you're raising your children, so many people even just give them candy to like leave me alone. Like here, have candy as a bribe. Candy is used as a bribe, or
And a
like you
reward, yeah.
said, as a cheer up. And as a reward and or to cheer up, like, oh, you're
Yeah.
sad. Let's go get ice cream. And I'm not saying that's bad parenting necessarily, but that's that development of, it becomes a comfort food. You mentioned eating disorders, and we've had a couple episodes of my show about eating disorders and people
Okay.
eating large amounts of not necessarily sugar, because any food could be a comfort food or a eating disorder food, but typically it is, the sweets or junk food or
Yeah.
what people, there's not a lot of people who go to salad as a comfort food. There's not a lot of
Exactly.
eating disorders where people are out here eating, fruit bowls and salads as their comfort food. It's typically ice cream, I would say, is probably the number one snack, chips and ice cream. But there's plenty of other ones. So I think it's interesting, like you said. I mean, as far as whether you're a believer in God or just the natural world, kids were meant to come out of the womb and eat all amounts of chocolate and candy. They were meant to eat regular natural food that's out there, which is meat and plants and vegetables. So
Yep. No, you're right. That's true. It's hard. It's hard to watch. Being an obese kid is hard, and
it should be
it's
child abuse, in my opinion. I've seen children, young children who are so overweight. And to me,
yeah.
that's just child abuse because it's not the kid's fault. Like you said, they don't even know what they're eating. They don't have conscious eating habits or that information. So to me, when I see that, I say the parents are neglecting, or, they could be uneducated, but it's just cruel to see that, like you said.
I believe it, man. And it is, like the kids don't mean to be mean. They're not trying to, but they go with the crowd and, to have that fatty, name calling and stuff, that hurts a kid's development. It's just hard.
Yeah.
Not to mention we have an epidemic of 5-year-olds with fatty liver disease. That's like an alcoholic's disease, right?
Yeah. That's
So
awful to hear that.
yeah, it's tough. It's tough. So
And so talking about, you've mentioned a couple different books and scientific studies, but you also have your own book, The Last Resort Sugar Detox Guide. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
yeah, the book is came out in 2018, and you can get it free on Amazon if you have a Kindle. And it's probably a need a little updating on the diet plan, the food plan part of it, but it's really my story, the story of me and the kids and how I came to understand all this. And it's got a lot of great recommendations. You can download it from the website, sugaraddiction.com too. It's also free there. Um, but you can get a hard copy on Amazon. But it really kind of kicked off, as I said earlier, the recognition that we've got these support systems, we've got these coaches, we've got all this kind of stuff. So yeah.
For sure. So would you say it's a great resource for people looking to, would you say it encourages them to try, detoxing themselves of sugar, as well as a guide for people who are struggling to stay, quote, sober from sugars, to stay sugar free?
Oh, absolutely. And we also have a 30-day detox, which is, I've redone 4 times. That thing is real. Um, it's comprehensive because after 40,000 plus detoxes, it's almost pattern recognition. I've seen it so many times. I can pretty much tell on what day, depending on how you come in, where your habit was when you came in, what day you're going to feel this, what day you're going to feel that, when you're going to,
Wow.
it's going to come back out a little bit, you know, when you're going to have to start working on your emotional life after the physical and all that. So it's a very comprehensive way to ease yourself out of it. You got to get 30 days of abstinence before you even begin the work. Most people in recovery understand that concept. I love
Right.
the phrase in recovery. I don't know if you've heard it. It's a good one though. Is treatment is discovery and meetings are recovery. And
Mm.
I love that because that's the same with our detox. You got to eat whole food. You've got to get some level of abstinence so you can kind of dig into your psyche and understand why you may have abused this drug, this substance, right? Why, to break the chain of the unconscious use that is society's view of sugar. Um, and once you do that, then you have to start working on if you had a real bad habit. Weight is only a measure of the habit, There's a lot of thin sugar addicts. I got a coach who's an ultra marathoner who's,
Yeah,
you, you don't have to be overweight to be a sugar addict. But self-reported now, 74% of obese people are sugar addicts.
for sure. So you talked about witnessing thousands of detoxes. So I have a big question for you that's been on my mind. Is
Okay.
it better? Because I'm sure anyone thinking of detoxing themselves, trying this at home, are going to see that there's two options really for them. Either just completely cut out, like starting today or tomorrow, zero sugar, or we can slowly cut back, cut back, cut back, cut back downward until it's zero. Have you seen both approaches? Is one the right answer? Is it depending on the person? How should we go about this?
Yeah, no, good question. So look, no matter how far you cut back, when you pull the Band-Aid off, you're going to have the withdrawals. And the withdrawals from people who've been through it three, four, five, six times, the withdrawals are pretty much the same. Your withdrawals are going to be pretty much the same each time, no matter what you did, whether you cut back or didn't cut back. The day you go zero, you get pretty much the same. And I will tell you that every time that you do it, so say you fail and fall back a couple times, the each time you try it, it gets a little harder, a little bit
Yeah,
more difficult. So, and look, very few people, this is just relapse is part of the process. Very few people do it first time out the gate. The goal is to don't quit quitting. The goal is
right.
to just keep coming back or whatever phrases you want to use, but is to just keep trying till you get it right. I've had coaches that 2 years in and out of the program, back and forth. And now they're coaches because, they stuck with it. So,
For sure. And what I'd say is that the cutting back, I feel like it leaves so much more room for temptation because you
yeah,
can just overindulge just a little bit, just enough so you feel like you met your cutback requirement but didn't cheat. So I think they call it cold turkey, where you just drop everything. Uh, but luckily we have your free online or paid hardcover copy, the book to help guide us, as well as I'm sure there are tons of resources out there to help us with this. Like you said, it's getting more and more attention, which is what we want, which is why you're here on the show to spread awareness. Because really, like you said, people don't know. We're being born and raised in a society where sugar is glorified in commercials. It's available everywhere at the tips of your fingers. I mean, you can order, milkshakes and candy to your door. You don't even have to leave the house anymore. So it's definitely an issue. One could call it an epidemic. But you said that you're seeing even the government now start to get some movement on that. So that's great. And I'd love to just end things here. What would be your final message to everyone? You've really talked about sugar foods, processed foods,
yeah.
addiction, and then just the effects of them that are really overlooked. So what would be your final message to everyone?
I think the important one, and you were talking about it earlier, the science of all this is very real now. It's just not an awareness in the public's eye yet. I've been lucky to be talking to the world's leading experts, but um, it's like smoking. As the science catches up with the reality of it, it's going to be a while. But, if you're serious about your health and your weight and your children's health and weight, sugar addiction is real. It's not yet in the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, but there are work groups to try and start getting that process going and to get that happening. And it will, in our lifetime, be something you'll be able to sign into a treatment center for, just like drugs and alcohol. And believe me, I know because I've talked to tens of thousands of these folks who are suffering and struggling with, they don't drink or they don't use drugs, some of them. But yes, it's very real, and reading up about it. And I always say, here my message is just let the information light on you. Just go in with an open mind, and you've tried everything else in the world, like all of these diets. There's the diet industry is $78 billion, enough to feed the entire unfed world every year. We spend on trying to
Wow.
reduce it, and we're still at 95% of people losing any amount of weight gain it all back. So we're failing miserably, and the obesity crisis continues. To look at sugar, ultra processed carbohydrates, in this really reframe of your show and this message that it might be an addiction. Nobody wants to be an addict. I get that. I understand that. They think of the guy with the brown paper bag under the bridge, but this is not a moral issue. This is a healthcare issue. And if you
Mm,
kind of just let that information light on you, and maybe accept it, and maybe, just give it a chance, give abstinence a chance, and give the work around addiction recovery, basically codependency recovery, saying no, sticking up for yourself, stop people pleasing and setting boundaries, you may be able to walk out of this thing. Okay. So, and most of all, be kind to yourself. Stop. Like I like to relieve people's stress that it's not their fault. We grew up in this society. Your parents didn't know. The food manufacturers, they knew, but they didn't, I don't blame them. So, you know, but it is your responsibility, now that you know and you listen to this show, to maybe take an alternative path to explore why you've not been able to lose weight or regain your health. So that's the short version of my long messaging. So
right. It's crazy to think. You mentioned smoking. I think that's a great example because my mom and dad, they're in their late 50s, and when they went to high school, they had
everybody,
smoking lounges where they and the teachers would just smoke cigarettes together. So in the same sense that I say, that's crazy. I can't believe they used to smoke in high school and have lounges for it. To think that my kids might say, Dad, you had candy and Pop-Tarts in the vending machines in
I
high
do believe
school.
that. Yeah,
That is an insane thought. But like you said, as the science comes out, as the truth comes out, just like there used to be, asbestos, was used to be built and everything. Time and science and the truth will come out and then things will change. But it starts with
yeah.
awareness. So, ladies and gentlemen, what I want you to do today is, well, firstly, check out Mr. Michael Collins in the description below, his website and book. But additionally, take a look in your life. Where are you with sugar? What is that relationship looking like? Is it one, like Mr. Collins into that, of codependency? You know, when are you eating sugar? Why are you eating sugar? And do you need to be? And the answer is no. So, ladies and gentlemen, be sure to check out Mr. Collins in the description below. And Mr. Collins, thank you so much for coming on the show and addressing a topic that is almost taboo, that people don't want to talk about, like you said, for a number of reasons. But appreciate you sharing your time today to put this out into the world.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's been an honor.
Sailing through the ocean blue, nuclear reactors my crew, guiding the ship, the stars as our guide, through the waves we ride, jokes and laughter fill the air. On this voyage we have to share, working together, side by side, as one family we will abide. In the heart of the ship we reside, Nuclear operators with pride, powering the vessel with every stride. Our mission, the source of great pride.